Be lifted high, be lifted high.
Hey guys, Midweek Refuel. Tonight we are in John chapter 12, and we're going to be in verses 1 through 11. We're actually continuing on with the story of Mary and Martha and Lazarus, just in a different context. But let's take a look at what it says here. Verse 1, Jesus, therefore, 6 days before the Passover, came to Bethany where Lazarus was, whom Jesus had raised from the dead. So they made him a supper there. And Martha was serving, but Lazarus was one of those reclining at the table with him. Mary then took a pound of very costly perfume of pure nard and anointed the feet of Jesus and wiped his feet with her hair. And the house was filled with the fragrance of the perfume. But Judas Iscariot, one of the disciples who was intending to betray him, said, "Why was this perfume not sold for 300 denarii and given to the poor people?" Now he said this not because he was concerned about the poor, but because he was a thief. And as he had the money box, he used to pilfer what was put into it. Therefore, Jesus said, "Let her alone so that she may keep it, or so that, yeah, she may keep it for the day of my burial. For you always have the poor with you, but you do not always have me." So this is in red letter, so obviously it's important, but even more important was this last phrase, and we'll get to that in just a minute. Verse 9, the large crowd of the Jews then learned that he was there, and they came not for Jesus' sake only, but that they might also see Lazarus, whom he raised from the dead. But the chief priests planned to put to Lazarus to death also, because on account of him, many of the Jews were going away and were believing in Jesus. So there's some similar themes to what we talked about last week. But let's start at the beginning. Jesus is at this home. This story is told in other gospels as well. It's usually told, I believe that Jesus was in the home of Simon, if I'm not mistaken, who was a Pharisee or a teacher of the law. He's invited into that environment, is what is highlighted in other gospels, and Mary is also there, and she anoints his feet with her hair, or with the perfume, and then wipes it with her hair. This one's a little different because it incorporates what we just read about with Lazarus and Martha and Mary. What's interesting is they highlight that Mary was serving again, obviously, or I'm sorry, Martha was serving again. Obviously, Martha, her part of her identity was being a great servant. Lazarus was there hanging with his friend, being a part of the group that was there assembled listening to Jesus. And Mary comes in with this very expensive gift to honor Jesus. That was, I believe, the point of um, her gift, her sacrifice was to honor Jesus in the midst of these men. It would have probably, I'm just talking off the top of my head here, but it might have been inappropriate for a woman to just barge in onto into a situation where men were talking. Certainly, if it was at the home of a Pharisee, that would also be something that would be questioned. Um, but here, it's highlighted because she was honoring and valuing the presence of Jesus, the significance of Jesus. And it wasn't so much about what she could receive from Jesus as much as how she could express her love and gratitude and devotion to Jesus. And so that was really, seemingly what her heart was. And so you contrast that with Judas, who responds with sort of righteous indignation by saying, well, this is a waste. She could have sold that perfume for 300 denarii, however much that is, and we could have fed lots of poor people with that money. It's interesting that John highlights here that first and foremost, Judas didn't care about the poor, and that really he was a thief, and he was actually stealing money from the coffers, from the stash. So he's stealing money from um, the savings or whatever of the group, and so John is highlighting that his motives weren't necessarily that of promoting the poor. What's interesting is I think if we take that example, we can even apply it in our time, where a lot of times people point to certain seemingly sacrificial acts, and really all they're doing is drawing attention to themselves, or they are trying to moralize situations and taking the perspective off of where it should be. And that's what Judas was doing here. Is it was an expression of devotion. It was an expression of love and honor for Jesus, and he's trying to be religious about it. He's trying to um, paint himself in a more favorable light than he actually was, and John calls him on it. And then, as I highlighted earlier, Jesus says something interesting, and that is, he says, "Leave her alone so that she may keep it for the day of my burial." Um, so they refer to the custom of preparing the body for burial. So Jesus is actually referencing that. They might not have known what he was talking about because they weren't anticipating that he would die, even though he said it lots of times. But then he says, I think what is the most important part of it, for you always have the poor with you, but you don't always have me. And for me, what that speaks of is it's kind of like the love chapter in First Corinthians 13. If you do all these amazing things, if you are involved in these great ministries and have great impact, it doesn't mean anything if you don't have love. And it just for me highlights the value of the presence of the Lord. Like that should be our highest value. Our love, our compassion, our ministry to others has to flow from that relationship. And too often we lead with ministry instead of relationship. And it doesn't mean that ministry is bad. It just means that sometimes our motives can be muddled by our desire to make impact, or it can be muddled by, in this case with Judas, a desire to enrich yourself or to promote yourself. And Jesus is really highlighting what I think is probably the message of the whole gospel, right? Like he said, the greatest commandments in the Old Testament were to love God with all your heart, soul, mind, and strength, and then love your neighbor as you love yourself. And then he even took it a step further later on and said, "Love one another as I have loved you." He took what he highlighted as the greatest commandments and became an embodiment of that, so that we could follow his example. And so here he's highlighting that. He's saying, "Experience me, and out of that will flow all these other things." And then it switches to a really interesting yet sad perspective. So obviously, Jesus goes into a town, he raises someone from the dead. That's going to cause a stir. It's going to cause people to talk. It's going to cause people to be curious. And so it says that they didn't just come for Jesus, they came to see Lazarus. I would think that would be a pretty incredible thing. I'm sure there were people there that had good motivation. They wanted to see, wow, this is an amazing miracle that only God can do. Let's go see this guy who was dead but is now alive. But the religious leaders, we've highlighted this before. The religious leaders, their view of it was, we're going to kill Jesus and this guy because we want people to stop following Jesus, which is such a weird thought process. It just shows that they missed what we were just talking about, that there wasn't a value for the presence of the Lord. There was a value for what they were doing. And so they felt that was more important than valuing what God was doing among them. And so their desire was to destroy these things that were in competition with their influence. And man, I just think these are things God is speaking to even us in this day and time, that sometimes we have been so about self-promotion. We live in such a self-promotion, narcissistic society. We love building our own platforms and promoting ourselves, and yet Jesus brings us back to the heart of the matter, which is loving God. He becomes our promotional agent. We let him do the promoting and we do the obeying. And the fruit of that is much better than our own self promotion. And so I think this is a great time in our history to hit a reset button. You know, we hear about the great reset, whatever that is. But I think the great reset is us going back to the basics, going back to the beginning of loving Jesus and loving others and letting him take care of the rest of that. You know, he says that if we seek first the kingdom, then everything else will be added unto us. And so that's our job, is just to seek the kingdom and let Jesus take care of the rest. And if we're supposed to have great influence, awesome, go and fulfill that call. If you're supposed to have influence on a few, that's great too. Go and influence your call. I'm realizing I'm not in competition with other people. I'm not in competition with their anointing or their calling or their gifting. That is unique to them, and it doesn't put me at odds with them. It doesn't put me in a competition with them. I get to celebrate who they are because of Jesus, and then I also get to value who God has created me to be without trying to be something that He has not made me to be. I think that is the great lesson for me in this day and time. So we can take a lot out of that. We will transition into a different theme. No more talking about Mary and Lazarus and Martha, but we're going to talk about Jesus entering Jerusalem the next time. And so that'll be next week. Have a great rest of your week. Follow Jesus, be influenced by him, let him promote you, let him create the platform, and you won't be sorry. So have a great week. We'll talk to you again next week.
Be lifted high, be lifted high.